Before we get started with our next phase of engagement, I want to do some level setting and just sort of go over some logistics for today's talk. First, I just want to acknowledge that there's a couple of devices that I have working in front of me. So as you see me looking down and referencing, it's because it's all necessary, because I can't actually see the screen, so I have to work with you from sort of behind the veil. So I hope that's not distracting, but I'm very much here with you and present as I continue to navigate these pieces. But the one thing I want us to do is take a moment to acknowledge the space that we're in, the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary homeland of the Dakota and the Anishinaabe. While many other tribes also reside here, I acknowledge the indigenous stewards of the land and acknowledge the violent theft of the land, and to be in solidarity of the land back movement, supporting the return of respective land, language, and culture to its rightful indigenous owners. And I encourage all of you who may or may not have your own practice of land acknowledgement to really explore how and what your engagement could look like beyond the stated words. Would anyone here like to share the names of the indigenous people whose land you traveled from to be here today? I would love for you to bring those peoples in the space with us. Yes. Thank you.
The Osage.
Thank you.
San Francisco, where we are, Ohlone tribe, where I'm from, the Shawnee and Sunwatch Indians. Native references.
Yes.
Raleigh, North Carolina, the Lumbee tribe.
I can't get them all. I'm from Oklahoma. We have 39 tribes.
Absolutely.
The 5 that were always there are the Caddo, the Wichita, the Tonkawa, and the Apache. Migratory are the Comanche, Kiowa, and Pawnee. And of course, we've had the numerous tribes sent to us through the removal acts of the 19th century, including the Chickasaw, Choctaw, Cherokee, Creek, and Seminole, the Peoria, Miami, Iowa, Oto, Missouri. I'm going to forget people, I know this. Osage, and Cheyenne, Arapaho, Yuchi, Modoc from California. All of them.
Ashe, Ashe, thank you for that. It's just a reminder that, listen, this is the contemporary, reality, and it's not as simplistic as, naming off one name. And oftentimes you're dealing with a very sort of textured and layered fabric of nations who intertwine and coexist. So our task is just to figure out where do we intersect and how do we enter that conversation in a way that's not just performative, but you find your own pathway into it. So I invite you, if you don't have your own practice, to sort of explore that and to really interrogate how you might intersect in a way that's meaningful for you. So thank you for sharing, everyone. So let's review the agenda for the workshop today, just so you know what you're getting into, right? So we are, again, having this conversation about weed killing, cultivating anti-racist and inclusive environments. We're going to have a foundational, conversation. The really great thing about today's agenda is that it's really simple. And overall, we're going to have this primary discussion about cultivating anti-racist and inclusive environments. Within that conversation, we'll begin with the discussion of some important and primary concepts. Then we'll have a group exercise leading into lunch, which will return from lunch. I'll share 6 strategies that you'll be able to replicate and deploy within your institutions. And then we'll proceed with closing out our session together. And how does that sound for everyone? Everybody with me? We're good? Okay, that's awesome. Now, throughout our chat today, you'll spend a large portion of this time, hearing my voice, listen to me speak to you, which is understandable. But there will also be a few times when you'll be asked to interact with each other in small sort of breakout groups, all right? I'm sure you can all appreciate that there's a value in the peer learning group, and we're gonna exercise and leverage that value as we interact today. And it's designed to give you the opportunity to really sort of deepen the connections, as you all have indicated in your own responses to the conveners that that's one of the goals that you had for today. So we're going to jump right into that and begin with our first opportunity to engage the peer learning environment and deepen our knowledge of each other. So what we're going to do is tighten this circle. And right now what I'm going to ask you to do is to form a small group right at your table. So for now, you don't actually have to move, all right? You will move a little bit later, but for right now, you're settled. So you can stay where you are. I'm going to give you 15 minutes to answer the following 4 questions, all right? Now, the questions are up here. What you're going to do is you're going to share your full name, any meaning or significance of your name that you may have. You're going to share where you were born, and from what, and if any, relationship you have to your birth city, and what obstacles, if any, or challenges hinders the cultivation of an anti-racist and inclusive environment in your workplace, which is why we're here, and what support are you actually seeking today? Those are your 4 prompts. And in case you forget those 4 prompts, again, they're right here on the screen for you to reference, and you're gonna have 15 minutes to engage in this conversation with your group, all right? Do I? Sorry. Oh, well, I skipped something. Let's talk about these guidelines. Thank you. I knew there was going to be a little bit of a hiccup. Thank you for that. Let's talk about these guidelines. So what you have here is the first one. Listen to understanding, not debate. So thank you for that. Our second one is you're going to stay engaged, right? Agree to disagree, but not to disengage. And our third is to recognize natural or imposed power dynamics and imbalances. I know some of you may be in the same institution, you might have some direct reports. Just really be mindful of how you might relate. Even as peers, you might have some, innate power imbalances. Just be mindful of that and make room for people to really sort of show up in your space. Speak your truth, knowing it's only part of the truth. It's certainly true for you, but it may not be the truth for others. And experience discomfort. I think we've heard echoes of this already throughout yesterday, to just lean into the idea of maybe you're going to have some moments of discomfort, and that's okay. It's an experience that we all should have every once in a while. It means you're growing, you're expanding. And finally, expect and accept non-closure. That's something we're carrying over from yesterday that was brought into the space. And I think for us, it was really apropos because we had a lot of stuff going on. And we're going to have a lot of stuff going on here today, too. So if we find that we're in a space where we didn't get to actually wrap up everything with a bow, we're going to lean into the fact that we were able to do what we needed to do, and we got the lessons that we were intended to receive, and that this conversation does not end today. It's the beginning of a larger conversation. All right? So with that said, let's get to the next slide, which in fact is tightening the circle. All right, so these are the 4 prompts that I initially shared with you. And those prompts again are, share your full name and any information you know about its origin or the inspiration of that name. Share where you were born and your current relationship, connection, if any, to your birth city, and what obstacle or challenge hinders the cultivation of an anti-racist and inclusive environment in your workplace. I'm wondering if you've already identified an issue that you're concerned about, and what support are you actually seeking today? Because one of the things we're going to lean into is your support is here. It's actually in this room. So if we begin to voice it, we're going to put together some strategies in order to help you actually work through them. Today's going to be a working day where you come out with real tools and solutions, ideally, to some of the things that you're working through. All right? Everybody clear on that? You have 15 minutes at your table to have that conversation. Thank you. Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. I would love for anyone, let's just do one person from every table. If you can just share what obstacle you are thinking through that you're hoping to address today, and potentially any support that you're looking for from the group. Who wants to go from the back table?
I can go. I'm Alexis from the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry, and Avi and I were both talking about the impact of pandemic layoffs and the burnout that our staff has gone through for the past few years, and so how that's an obstacle to more change. And so how can we support people through change when they're already in a feels fragile space?
I heard a lot of oohs that resonated with some people, so thank you for that. I'm just going to go around this way, so let's go to this table.
I'll go. I'm gonna borrow what Joetta mentioned, the obstacle is basically moving forward beyond a hashtag and opportunity for a new grant by tagging DEI to your work, and really being authentic in that work from adding all of our obstacles from the top down and making sure that it is in every way authentic.
Absolutely. I hear you. Everybody hear that?
We discussed, a bunch of us work in organizations in the South. So we're discussing the ways in which we can learn from this session and bring back what we've learned without alienating people that don't find it important. It sucks to operate in that way, but the work's gotta be done kind of thing, so you gotta just be pragmatic, strategic, and then also trying to not feel like dejected when people don't want to listen to what you have to say.
Absolutely. It's a very common dynamic, whether or not you're in the South, that you don't necessarily get always greeted with a parade. And sometimes you have to work around and under people. And you don't, one of the things we're going to talk about today is one of the pitfalls is waiting for someone to move or shift and working at their pace. And that's an unnecessary pause in the process. This table here.
I talked about, I mean, really similar to what you just said, that, we have my workplace and my board are predominantly white females, and that we're always looking at, like, well, how can we have a more diverse workforce, and that perhaps if we were just actually doing the anti-racist work, then, like, that's the first step. But then this pitfall is that if we're doing that work well enough and publicly enough that our community is seeing it and folks are recognizing that we are in a safe, good place to be, that there will be backlash, that our community is not progressive as a whole, and that we have to make the decision that it's worth it.
Absolutely. We'll talk a lot about that in just a minute. This table here.
Okay, so I think a couple of different obstacles I think that were a threat were the geography of where people are, creating sort of organic obstacles to being able to have certain types of discussions or to have a certain type of thought process. And it was a variety of different locales at the table. But I think that I felt a little bit more drawn to the ones who were struggling with their geography, because I don't really in San Francisco as much. So.
Well, just for clarity, was a struggle that it was
The
a
struggle is
monolithic
that
community?
there's a political environment,
Okay.
there's a political climate, there's maybe a cultural climate where some folks are.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
So we had a lot of similar barriers, which was the legislation. So we have 2 Kansans, a North Carolinian, and a Texan. So all vastly different regions, but we're dealing with much of the same problem. So how do we make anti-racism and the work that we need to do embedded in our organizations throughout instead of just ticking a box? I mean, human rights is on the outside of our building, but I don't think that we really live up to or embody what we're trying to teach to the public. And I think I got a similar feeling from other people, like HR is not on board, even though it is something that staff members are on board with. And then, just the red tape of legislation. So how do we do what we need to do without running afoul of the laws that say, no, you can't?
Absolutely, and I think that that's obviously a really specific, thing that one has to contend with depending on where you are in the country, as you were saying. And you certainly don't have to put yourself in jeopardy of breaking the law to actually live your value. What you do sometimes have to do, though, is educate your legal team. right? I have found that sometimes really communicating what it is, the intent of the organization is, and asking for guidance how to do that legally can have a different conversation as opposed to them beginning with legal and telling you what you can or cannot do. So your clarity, to your point, it's not an option about making that goal the first step, making that organizational shift the first step. It's actually a requirement. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. But I think what you'll find is in order to actually get the success that you're looking for, that first step is necessary. And if legal is one of the real issues you're contending with, you might have to do an education to your legal team. So what I want to do, for those of you who might have missed it at the very top, just reintroduce myself to this group and just share a little bit about who I am, what I do. Again, my name is Sharifa Joka, she, her, and I'm a change management consultant that works with nonprofit orgs as well as corporations and institutions to operationalize anti-racist principles across sectors. I worked a lot in the art sector because as a profession, I'm also a creative producer, and my work sort of begun at the intersection of film and television. And for the past 15-ish years, I've been working in theater a lot. And one of the things that I have begun doing is providing sort of leadership around how do you look at creating an atmosphere that will attract diverse talent, that will lean into the value in a real and authentic way, and how does one do institutional audits to actually get to that point of real authentic engagement, internally and externally. And what that oftentimes looks like, it takes the course of several conversations. Some people want to focus on hiring and recruitment, and others want to look at what's the culture once you hire and recruit. And one of the areas of discussion in that area of discourse is what I refer to as weed killing, which of course is what I'll be sharing with you today, right? As we have this conversation today about cultivating anti-racist and inclusive environments, I think it's important to spend a moment to unpack the rationale in the first place for having an anti-racist approach, right? I don't mean like why you're doing it or why it's important overall, but I want to speak directly to why I framed this conversation and approach this challenge of cultivating inclusive environments from an anti-racist framework and not an alternative one, right? So by lifting up the lens of race, I'm leaning into a basic idea around the centrality of race. Now, which is a framework and a conceptual tool, an idea, a way of problem solving when dealing with societal issues, right? The inequities in the law, whether it's poverty, homelessness, COVID, police brutality, healthcare. If you approach these societal issues with the lens of race due to its significance of how we're socially organized, like sociologists have identified that there are areas of our identity that have the most significance on our life, right? Areas of identity that often determine how you live, and in some instances, if you live at all. Right? The centrality of race aligns with this reality and identifies race and structural racism as a societal reality that if systematically dismantled, you are putting yourself at the intersection of opportunity that allows you to look at these ways in which we feel structural oppression because of the way that race is often plainly marked on our body and its saliency, right? The way it actually disrupts and disturbs when it intersects with class, gender, abilities, age, nation of citizenship, and other societal identifiers. It'll give you a substantive foundation to address the many systemic barriers that were erected as a result of white supremacy. Now, when you have a robust approach to dismantling systemic racism, you have an opportunity to address other significant areas of identity that exist within the spectrum of BIPOC people, right? So I make this point very specifically to underline that cultivating anti-racist spaces does not let you off the hook for dismantling sexism in your organization, right? It does not let you off the hook for dismantling heteronormative culture or ableism. In fact, it assumes and provides an opportunity to ensure the opposite, because it assumes you are centering the needs of the full spectrum of BIPOC folk, right? Which of course includes BIPOC folk that identify as women, BIPOC folk that identify as queer, BIPOC folk that identify as having a disability. You're simply using race as a lens, a tool for inquiry and problem solving, right? Now, further, embarking upon cultivating an anti-racist environment in your workspaces, a radically inclusive environment, implies you have made a commitment to be an anti-racist organization. Approaching the wide range of organizational issues with an anti-racist lens, an inclusive approach, and therefore cultivating an anti-racist environment is in alignment with that organizational goal. Now, due to the nature of this convening and your presence here, right, I'm assuming that organizational commitment has been made. Maybe not. But at the very least, if your entire organization has not leaned in, your department, your work group, your work team has leaned into the power of individual agency potentially, and you've made that commitment, despite the fact that your overall org may not have arrived at identifying itself as anti-racist. So let me get a sense of who's in the room. Like what is the status of what's happening in your organizations? If just by raise of hands, would you describe your org as an organization that defines itself as anti-racist? Anyone in this space? If you defines itself as anti-racist, okay. And are the other of you whose hands are down or maybe even halfway down, are you the catalyst? Is it your work group, your department that's taking the lead? Is that sort of what's happening here? Okay. Can anyone sort of tell me like why it's important, right? To root your goal around this cultivation with the context of an organizational value and or business imperative. Is everybody clear on the importance of that? I see you're nodding, and your hand is up.
I was going to attempt to answer the question.
Go for it.
I think assuming that a lot of people in here, well, we're nonprofits. So nonprofits like to have a mission statement for adherence to, because that's a way that they can say, oh, well, that doesn't really align with where we see our agency going. It also is something that gets thrown out a lot for like grant writing and other funding sources. And so I think if your mission and your business model both embody anti-racism, then there's a lot of things you could extrapolate and do from that, as you touched on, like tackling ableism, heteronormativity, and other spaces where people may feel afraid to be their full authentic selves when they come to work, or that may discourage members of the public from patronizing your organization.
Anyone else? Thank you for that. I mean, ultimately, you all have already named it. You have these potentially superficial gestures. You might have sporadic success. You don't have anything tangible, anything rooted. You might find yourself, I've heard people talk about toxic conversations that might rely on personal points of view, debating an issue, when in fact, you need an organizational root that allows you to not personalize the issue, but everyone sort of rises up to how the organization has defined itself. So in the absence of that value being clearly stated, there is an initial step that all of you all have to take before we actually deploy the work that we're doing here today. Even if you are not able to actualize the work on behalf of the big O organization or the big B business, you all are working in some capacity in a department, in a work group, on a work team that you have the ability to define in a very specific way. You can begin that work there. You can simply say, as this work group, as this department, as this team, there's some reason why you were allowed to be here. Either you self-elected, you lobbied internally, you have some agency to marshal those resources, the time, the commitment to be in this space. What I am naming for you, in the absence of this value being clearly articulated, that you have to use that same agency that got you here and to formulate that value at the level for which you control. As the beginning, right? You're not letting leadership off the hook. You're just not gonna hide behind leadership if that's your issue as a way to abdicate your own personal agency and responsibility. Is that clear? In larger institutions, I often hear people talk about the big L leadership, all these people who won't let you do certain things. And my question for you is, well, what are you able to do at the level that you're working within, right? Smaller organizations often tell me there's no resources. I have said nothing that costs money yet, right? I have said two things. You need to make a commitment that you're doing this. You then need to inform the group of people that you have stewardship over that you're doing this. And then you share, listen, we're gonna systematically go through the way that we operate, our methodology, our policies, our procedures, including this cultivation of a culture that we're seeking, right, to align with our goal. And you may be the model in your institution. You might be the catalyst that helps a larger conversation bloom and grow. It's certainly not the ideal model. And again, you don't let leadership off the hook. You still have to strategically organize in a way that allows for that work to be seen at another level. And we're going to talk collectively about what those strategies can look like. Does that make sense for people? All right. So we gotten that out of the way. What I want to do is I want us to go to a little bit of an exercise. We're going to move around just a little bit. And what I'm going to do is give you a handout. If you can take one and pass this around, we're just going to start defining some of the cultures that many of you might find yourself in. So you just have a shared language about what it is you're up against. That should be enough for everyone. And I'm warning you now, I'm going to be pulling on some volunteers. So prepare yourself to potentially be selected. Or if you want to be proactive and raise your hand, feel free. Who could read for me exclusionary and the club? Got that? Who can read compliance token? Everyone remember what you agreed to do. Who can read affirmative action? Thank you. Who can read redefining self-renewing organization? Thank you. And finally, inclusive organization. Got that? Okay, great. All right. And then who's going to read the note at the bottom? You got that? Okay, fantastic. Okay, so can I get the first volunteer to please take us through the first two?
Exclusionary organization. An organization that is openly exclusionary in its mission and organizational structures. The club organization. Does not openly advocate against diversity and inclusion, but the organization is structured to maintain the status quo. White men make up most of the top leadership on staff and the board. They set the tone for the organization's mission, policies, practices, and cultural norms. These norms are seen as correct and are used to define and maintain the organization's culture. Others may participate but are required to assimilate and fit into the defined cultural norms.
Okay, before you go forward, I just want to say a note about the exclusionary organization. Sometimes when you read that, you might go directly to the extreme. You might think, it's a right-wing group, it's a Klan, et cetera. But the reality is that's most of our organizations. That's most of our institutions. So I want you to really get grounded in reality, that we're not in fantasy land, we're in the real world. And most of institutions exclude in this way. And the club is just another layer of what that can oftentimes look like. All right, who is queued up next?
3 is compliance token organization, committed to removing some of the rigidness inherent in the club, but does not want to make too many waves. Hires more women and people of color, especially in entry-level positions, may hire a person of color or woman in a management position as long as she does not challenge the organization's missions or practices and is seen as fully qualified. In this organization, women and people of color are clear that there is a ceiling on how high they can go.
Oh my God.
See, that resonates with some people. Okay. If we can get the next person to read.
Okay. Affirmative action organization committed to eliminating the rigidness in the club organization. Women, people of color, and other targeted groups are actively recruited for employment at all levels of the organization. The organization actively supports the growth and development of traditionally targeted groups, but only in ways that do not challenge the organizational culture or status quo. Encourages non-sexist and non-racist thinking and behavior. However, norms and practices are still established by a white male culture and are expected to be maintained.
Thank you. Can I get the next slide, please?
Okay. Redefining self-renewing organization is self-reflective and in transition. Questioning organizational norms is not just tolerated but encouraged. It openly examines all aspects of the organization's mission, policies, practices, and management styles to see how they may negatively affect the personal growth and success of all staff, especially historically excluded groups. Recognizes the organizational benefits to diversity and inclusion and includes a wide range of cultural perspectives in the organizational culture. Diversity is reflected throughout the organization.
Great. Next volunteer.
Number 6 is inclusive organization. Reflects the values of diversity and inclusion in its mission, policies, practices, and cultural norms. Diverse cultural and social perspectives are represented and supported throughout the organization. There is an awareness and respect given to diverse cultural groups, whether or not they are represented in the organization. Diversity is reflected at all levels of the organization. The organization is committed to diversity and inclusion through and through.
And that final note, please.
No. These are not stages that all organizations must go through. It may be helpful to see each stage as separate and distinct and not as a prerequisite to get to the next stage. An organization may start from any place and move to any place.
Absolutely. So I'm going to ask everyone to stand and just push in your chair to make walking around the tables easier. And I'm going to reveal all of the stages that we just talked about. Can I get help over there behind you, those two? And can I ask someone to get the one on that cabinet over there? And if you, not that one, but that one right there. There you go. Okay, so what you'll see is exclusionary over there in that corner. You'll see the club right there by the clock. You'll see compliance token, affirmative action, redefining self-renewing, and inclusion over there. So if you can just quietly move to the space that reflects your organization most accurately, where it is right now. Okay, the thing went away. Did the thing go away? Okay. Okay, so what group is, over there is inclusion, yeah? Okay. Are you all in between or are you all just, where are you all? Right here. It shouldn't be down. Is it up? Okay, thank you. Are you all in between or you're right here? Okay. And where are you all? Affirmative action? Where does affirmative action stop?
I have a question.
Yes.
I'm a little bit in between.
Okay, so carve out in between in the circle. If you're in between, go into the circle and stand in between the spaces that you're occupying. Okay? Okay, great. So these are the prompts I want you to reflect on in your group. You're going to answer the question, why are you in this group? That's question number 1. Why are you in this group? Number 2, what specific examples support your choice for being in this group? Number 3, how does your role in the organization intersect with the cultivation of an anti-racist and inclusive environment? Where do you live in that intersection? And how can the members of your small group assist you in your efforts? Those are the 4 questions. Why did you pick the group? What specific examples support your choice for being in that group? How does your role intersect with the culture? And how can the members of your group support you? All right? You have 15 minutes.